Okay. Welcome, everybody. My name's Dr. Jackie Jacob, and I am one of two poultry specialists here at the University of Kentucky. I specialize in small and backyard flocks, as well as 4-H programming. And as part of my job, I help coordinate the community of practice on E-Extension. E-Extension is the electronic version of the National Cooperative Extension Service here in the United States. It's all electronic. And as part of that, we do monthly webinars. All of our webinars are recorded and are available online for future viewing. This one is being recorded. After we get started, I will type in the chat box the web page where we have articles and where the recordings of the past webinars, as well as information on upcoming webinars, are located. So today's topic is on breeding poultry, or chickens, I assume mostly. And today's speaker is Emily Shoop from Penn State. All yours. I will be on mute. If there is a question, you can either type it in the chat box or in the Q&A. If the question is a clarification on what Emily is talking about at that time, you'll see my face pop up and I will ask the question. If it's not directly related to what she's talking about, we'll hold it to the end. So if you think of a question, just type it in the chat box or in the Q&A box. And I'll see you at the end.
Alrighty, thanks so much, Jackie. I'm going to go ahead and put myself on no camera, not mute, but just no face, because my internet here in the middle of central Pennsylvania is just awful. So hopefully the phone doesn't ring, because it's about like 2002 around here where the phone rings, I get bumped off the internet. But if that happens, we'll roll with it. So bear with me here with my bad internet. But today I'm here to talk to you about breeding purebred poultry. And I kind of titled this Experience and Lessons Learned from a Breeder, Exhibitor, and Judge. I've been exhibiting poultry since I was 3 years old. Been breeding poultry since I was about 16, kind of on my own, making my own decisions with our flock. My dad is a licensed poultry judge. He judges all over the country and sometimes internationally. I think this weekend he's heading up to Grimsby, Ontario to judge a fair up there. So he's also been to Bermuda and the Bahamas to judge too. So he's been all over. We've both been all over judging. I got my judging license in December of this year, and we'll be taking on my first big girl poultry judge job here the first weekend in October at the Dayton Fancy Feather Club in Ohio. So when I like to introduce myself, I say that I'm a 4-H youth development educator in Mifflin County. Many of you that might have known me previously, I was a poultry educator with Penn State Extension. In April, made the switch over to 100% youth development. And so I manage our county 4-H program here in Mifflin County, Pennsylvania, right in the middle of the state, south of State College. But I'm a little more comfortable in this realm, holding, petting, showing, and judging chickens. All started when I was really little. I have consistently judged fairs and junior shows since I was in college. You can usually find me with a bird in my hand, usually never too far away from a chicken. Thankfully, with my new position as a 4-H youth development educator, I get to focus more on my own home flock. So you'll see some of my birds here throughout the presentation as well, and some of the birds I've raised over the years. Most recently is this one down here in the left-hand corner. That rose-comb white leghorn is a bird that I bought in November, and she unfortunately has passed away, but she was a fun bird to have around. Her name was Bianca. She was a nice chicken. So today, when we talk about purebred poultry, I assume most of you are thinking about exhibiting birds, or at least having some type of show poultry, whether that's chickens, ducks, geese, or whatever. Really, most folks are going to focus on chickens. For those of you that are focusing on ducks, we can kind of answer some of those questions more specifically if you have them. But your success is really defined by your overall goals. If your goal is to raise a flock of laying chickens, you really don't care what breed or variety, you just want eggs, then your available space, your budget, your time, the things that you invest in your flock, and the birds that you select all need to reflect that, what your overall goal is, that prolific amount of eggs. If you're like me and you want to show a rare breed of chickens, start bolstering up the numbers of that flock, and seeing more of them at shows, then it might take a little more space, bigger budget, more time, and definitely a lot more equipment and initial investment in the birds that you have. And that timeline may take a lot more time than it would just to raise a 2-year-old flock of layers. We'll talk a little bit later about starting with what you have. You don't have to go out and invest in the $10,000 chicken. If you find one, I wouldn't recommend it. The $10,000 chicken usually is the best chicken in the world. Like I said, Bianca and her 2 friends that I bought in November never laid an egg. They were promised to be really great show birds, but their price tag did not reflect the fact that they were not prolific at all. I never got a chick out of those birds. They never laid an egg. So just keep that in mind when you're purchasing poultry and when you're looking for birds, that it's not about what you spend on them. It's about the genetics and the potential that might be there. So when we think about this, we want to figure out what kind of birds we want to raise. If you're raising birds for meat, this probably isn't the presentation for you, but there's some examples of what you might want to raise for meat. Broilers, waterfowl, turkey, Cornish rock crosses. Some folks are real interested in guineas. I know folks have been processing guinea fowl at home lately. That seems to be a new thing. Then we move on to our egg layers. Those egg layers, a lot of times we have these dual purpose breeds, so they can produce meat, produce eggs, and sometimes they're great exhibition birds. But if you really want to focus on things, most of the time our egg laying birds that your Tractor Supply, your chickens that you might find at the feed store that come from one of those larger hatcheries, probably aren't the best exhibition birds. They are great for youth, or they're a great place to get started. But really when we're looking for exhibition or purebred birds, we want to find something from a breeder. So I think there's really 3 points when you're raising any kind of successful flock. The first is nutrition. You cannot run a car on poor gasoline. You can't run a vehicle on poor fuel. So think of it that way. Nutrition is really key. We're not going to talk too much about that today. Another portion of that is management, the space, the equipment, the time, and the way that you manage your birds, your cleaning schedules, conditioning, cage training, getting birds ready for show, washing, conditioning those birds. That's a whole other portion of having successful exhibition poultry. I'm going to try to dock this meeting control. There we go. So all that management, all the space and things required, that's another portion of this. Today, we're really going to focus on genetics, but not so much the phenotypic or genotypic traits, the Punnett squares and things like that. More of starting with what you have, learning how to make mistakes, and really realistically evaluating your flock and doing it frequently enough that you can make changes in the right direction and move the needle towards the show birds that you're looking for. Purebred poultry typically exhibit breed type, color, condition, and the flock is consistent. So if you have a flock of, for this example, the picture here is of BB red cubalea. So if you have a flock of cubaleas and you have BB red, they should all be consistent in type, color, and condition, or maybe not so much condition depending on how you're raising them, but they should be consistent in type and color. So all of our males should typically look the same way. They have that tail that falls below horizontal, big proud type birds. They have a pea comb, red faces, white legs, just like you see here in this picture. If I would put this male onto a female, they're going to breed true. They're not going to produce something that looks completely wild and out of character, out of sorts for a cubalea. They're going to produce more BB red cubaleas. When we're thinking about purebred poultry, we're going to keep and cull based on breed standards. And I'll talk about that here in just a little bit. And not all purebred poultry have a written standard. And it's really important to remember that. I know a lot of folks are interested in, and have been for years, in these IM Samanis, which are the black birds that have black skin, black feathers, black organs, typically are supposed to have black tongues and black feet pads. The more I see them, it shows I really do have to inspect them, because sometimes they'll have a pink tongue or pink bottoms on their feet. But there's no written standard for those birds, other than the fact that we know that they should be black all the way through. There are different color types that don't have a written standard. Folks are working on creating that written standard. Last December, I was at a show where they had a qualifying meet for the self-blue Americana Bantam. So tiny bird, self-blue in color, Americana. Had not been an accepted color variety before. There's self-blue in a lot of other breeds, but not in Americana. So they had to show about 100 birds that were consistent in color and type for the Americana. So that was something that a lot of folks across the country are working on, different color varieties, different breeds. It's been a while since we've had a new breed come on the scene, but it is possible if you get enough folks together that are interested in that single breed and can make it happen. And there's a process for that for each association. Crossbred poultry, typically what we're going to see most of the time at our county fairs, or maybe just that typical backyard chicken. They're not necessarily consistent in expressing their breed characteristics. So this picture I have is of what I like to call single comb silky. This guy here has a single comb. He's got just a few feathers on his legs. He's not really silky in feather like a show silky would be. I should have put a show silky there. That's a pretty drastic difference between this guy and a show silky. He does have the turquoise earlobes, oddly enough, and black skin like a silky should, but he should have a walnut comb. He should have profusely feathered legs, be just really fluffy, hairy looking almost, to be considered a silky. Also, this bird is in a standard size cage and filling it out pretty well. So way too big, again, for a true Bantam breed like a silky. Some of these crossbred poultry can have terminal genes. I know a lot of folks always say that the naked neck chicken, which I have a couple of out in the barn, are a cross between a turkey and a chicken. They call them turkins. And that's pretty much impossible genetically. We can't breed two different species like that together. It would create a terminal cross. Some of these crossbred poultry also have disqualifications. We'll talk about disqualifications and defects later. But for show, this bird came to our fair a couple years ago. Had a nice discussion with the young lady that brought him to the fair, that she had these birds running around the yard. She wanted the opportunity to participate. Absolutely, we'll let her participate in 4-H and show these birds, with the understanding that there are some other birds that have better characteristics, breed characteristics for the breed that they're exhibiting. And the pen may be right next door to hers. So for crossbred poultry, there's not a written standard for them. The best example here would be the Easter egger. The Easter egger is a hybrid of two different breeds, the Americana, Araucana, and they've bred several other things into the Americana and Araucana to create the Easter egger. They come in every color variety known to man. There's not a lot of consistency among Easter eggers, other than the fact that they lay a very colorful egg. So they lay a blue-green egg, sometimes pink, sometimes more towards the olive shades. But there's no written standard for an Easter egger. There are written standards for the Americana and Araucana, but when we start crossing these breeds together, we lose a lot of those breed characteristics, that make things really consistent. And I always say crossbred's not really an ideal place to start, but for some of us, crossbreds are where we have to start. Like I said earlier, my goal was to raise a rare breed. I've been kind of obsessed with a Sultan for a really long time. Ever since I was in college, I saw a couple and got my dad onto the Sultans and said, hey, you need to hunt some of these down for me. If there's a point where I can have birds again, I'd really like to have some Sultans. And so he hunted these up for me last fall. We started hatching and kept my birds at my dad's house. He got tired of that. He shipped them over to Pennsylvania once I got my new job and was able to have poultry. But that picture there on the left-hand side are of Dave, Katie, and Cece. Katie and Cece are the two white girls, and Dave is my little dude there in the back. I had to start this way because I didn't have a male. My goal was to create not only just a rare breed, but an even more rare color, blue. So when you breed black and blue together, you can create sometimes a 25% mix of blue. And I was really hoping for some blue. That's a Diuckle. That's what Dave is. He's not even a Sultan. But I'm crossing breeds here to try to bring down the size. And Katie and Cece, they were quite big, looking to reduce their size based on the breed standard, and then also add in that possibility for blue color genetics. The picture in the middle is their offspring. Funny enough, I guess, Dave was not breeding these two females. They had been bred by another Sultan at the lady's house that they had came from. And so I got more Sultans to my surprise, nothing actually out of Dave. So this chick in the middle there, her name was George. George ended up a nice show bird. So I took her to shows this past fall and showed her around. And it was great to see more than one Sultan at a show. It's just a really rare breed that not a lot of folks focus on, simply because they're hard to breed. I was talking to Jackie earlier, I've had very little success hatching my own chickens here. 2 degrees in poultry science, they're going to come take my degrees away because I can't seem to hatch anything. And I think I've got some equipment malfunction. We'll see. I have some hens setting on their own eggs right now. We'll see if they can do the job better than I can. I also made the mistake that I tell people not to make all the time and buy from reputable breeders. I bought from a guy who said he had Sultans, and I arranged my dad to go pick these birds up. Saw some pictures of them. The parents, unfortunately, I couldn't find those pictures of these birds' parents, but they looked great in the pictures. My dad goes to pick them up. They're covered in mites. They were just not Sultans. Did not have those breed characteristics that screamed Sultan to me or to my dad. And I said, oh, well, we'll quarantine them, see if we can get any eggs out of them, see how we do. So lo and behold, these 2 chicks hatch out. We have this nice black one here in the front. On the left-hand side, I was like, oh, that looks like a really good, that has some potential. That looks like a Sultan. It's got a crest. It had the right number of toes, feathered legs. Oh, this might look okay. And then the other ones were a little marginal. I was a little nervous about what they were going to grow up to look like. And about 6 months later, I have these guys on the right. That black chick that had the nice crest that I thought had some potential, she's there in the back. Shortly after this picture was taken, she died. She was just not very healthy because the flock that I got them from wasn't very healthy. That bird in the front, however, is the one that's in the back and the left-hand side. Came out frizzled. Came out a color that I could not discern, maybe silver lace, not really sure. Came out with this funky looking crest that kind of looks like a mohawk. That bird ended up going to the auction too, and it did not last very long here because that bird's not what I would consider Sultan. Very cute, and they were all very friendly. Would have been great for a pet project, but not necessarily in my breeding program here. So when I talk about the standards, there's 2 poultry associations here in the United States that kind of govern what we do as far as our breed standards. That would be the American Poultry Association and the American Bantam Association. Their websites are listed there. They create by committee a group of standards that are released about every 4 years. And you can purchase those online there at those websites listed. The American Poultry Association Standard of Perfection, the 44th edition, I believe. Yep, 44th. I'm looking at the one I have behind the computer. Lists all the breeds and varieties of chickens, ducks, geese, guinea fowl, and turkeys. It's a great resource for breeders of all sizes. Has color pictures, lists all the weights, lists defects, disqualifications, really describes in words and in pictures how each breed and variety should look. The American Bantam Association Standard lists all of those same things for Bantam chickens and ducks. There are color photographs of actual birds in the middle of that standard, and it's a really great resource for folks that are going to raise Bantam chickens or ducks which are those miniature breeds, about 1/5 the size of a normal sized chicken. Again, you can purchase that online. They're about $50 a piece. It's essential if you want to become a judge, or if really, I think if you want to dive deep into the history of your breed, maybe explore some different breeds that interest you, or get to know the breed that you already have. These books are a wonderful resource for new breeders. That's actually how I found Sultans. One day I was flipping the standard open, and I knew a lot about different breeds from breeding my own chickens, but I really focused on the breeds that I had. I didn't get too far outside of my comfort zone, and flipped that open and thought, man, that's a cool looking chicken. So that's how I got a hold of the Sultans, then saw some in person and thought they were really interesting. Understanding their history, they came from Turkey. They were kept by Sultans. That's therefore called Sultans. Really, really just neat birds. Everything that's wrong with a chicken is right on a Sultan. And my dad raises Cochins, so he loves to tell me that I'm crazy and that I should just avoid the crazy chickens and just keep with the easy stuff. So the next resource I wanted to show you guys, available on the American Bantam Association website, is Poultry Breeding by Ralph Sturgeon. Ralph is an old time breeder. I think he's passed by now. This book is titled Start Where You Are with What You Have. I think it's about $10 online. It's been reprinted it was a series of articles that Ralph put into a newspaper publication called the Poultry Press, which is kind of our news source in exhibition poultry. But this series of articles was then condensed into this book, and it's a really great guide for breeders of all ages and all paths to help determine the positive and negative attributes that of flock that you already have, taking what you have at home, breeding those birds together, and finding success in the showroom, defining your own success, but finding success in the showroom based on what you have, not having to go out and spend a ton of money on starter chickens, using what you have to go from now. So again, another great resource that's relatively cheap and easy to get a hold of. So now we'll move into kind of the disqualifications and defects, like what constitutes a good show chicken. Typically, our good show chickens are free from disqualifications and defects. A disqualification is a phenotypic trait, so an outside trait that eliminates the bird completely from competition. So I have a picture here from one of my small flock clients, Lori Korb. This is her, what we would consider a crossbreed chicken, a light Brahma mixed with an Americana. So it is neither of those things. I'll tell you that right now. It is neither an Americana. It can't be shown as an Americana because there's some severe disqualifications for an Americana. And it can't be shown as a light Brahma because there's some severe disqualifications for light Brahmas in this bird. Some of those general disqualifications are lacking in breed characteristics or lacking in breed type. When we talk about type in chickens, it's really the shape of the bird, the outside shape of it, the different anatomy that makes up that bird. So for a light Brahma, it should have a pea comb. The comb that's on this bird is a lot of things, but it's not a pea comb. Looks kind of like a buttercup comb to me. I'd really have to get my hands on him to see what it is. Also, it's lopped. Pea comb can't be lopped on any type of bird, so that would be a disqualification. As far as if we were going to show him as a Brahma, he lacks feathers on his feet or on his legs. A Brahma is a feather-legged breed that needs those feathers on its legs and feet in order to be considered a Brahma. Brahmas also aren't bearded. You can see the beard and the muffs there on this guy. He's got that interesting looking beard, which would not make him a Brahma, but it could make him an Americana. As far as Americana, he's not a good one if I had to be a judge in that sense. But anatomically incorrect. When we talk about different parts that should be on a bird, they need to be there. For Sultans, for my example, is always Sultans have 5 toes. If it's lacking in 5 toes, it's a disqualification. I was at a show not too long ago where I saw a bird that had 5 toes on one foot and 4 toes on the other. And so There are like 15 things that a sultan needs to have, and 10 of them are toes. So when we're missing one of those things, it is unfortunately going to eliminate that bird from the competition. When we're lacking in described color, or where there's color where it should not appear, sometimes that can be a defect. More often than not, it's a disqualification. If this was an all white bird, all of that black feathering would be a disqualification, or vice versa if it was a black bird with all that white feathering. Positive enamel white in the face. When we see white in the face of birds that do not allow white face, we see that a lot with 4-H judging and with collegiate poultry judging. Positive enamel white in the face is definitely a disqualification. And then signs or symptoms of any contagious disease or parasite. I've been on the receiving end of that several times, where I've pulled a really nice bird out of a cage in perfect condition, thought that it could really make it onto the show, and under further inspection, I see some mites or lice or something that bird has picked up. It sneezes, it's coughing, it's just feeling sickly. Maybe he's got some diarrhea going on. Any of those contagious diseases are just not welcome in the showroom, especially under the scrutiny that we are right now with high path avian influenza and kind of the fragility of the show industry in the United States, especially here in Pennsylvania, where we're not actually allowed to show birds until January. So any of those signs or symptoms of disease, definitely a disqualification. And we'd really ask, most show staff will ask that bird to go home immediately. As far as defects, I'm not going to completely eliminate your bird from the show, but definitely will cut it down in the points or the overall score that it receives. So cut it from a first place maybe to a second, or a first to a third. Some of those defects, general defects that I could come up with on the spot here, were more or less than 5 points on a single comb. So we can see this nice white leghorn here. She's got, if I can count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, at 6-ish, plus the blade on her comb. Otherwise a really nice bird here, but if I were to tell you that she was a pullet, she would be disqualified, because pullets cannot have a lopped comb. So pullet is a female under a year old. A hen would be a female over a year old. Hens can have lopped combs, so where their comb kind of folds over. Pullets cannot have that lopped comb. So that would be a defect or a disqualification in that breed. As far as other defects, eye color. Eye color is worth 2 points. So you can cut either all or partial points for the incorrect eye color. And you would think that something so insignificant like eye color would not matter, but it has several times, especially in the showroom. It makes the decision between 2 birds for champion of the show. Lacking a dimension on patterned birds. So if we go back to this guy here, we can see in his hackle feathers, those neck feathers around the neck there, that they're really yellow. Now that may be dirt, or that may be sun staining, or maybe that's just how his feathers grew in, very yellow like that. They should be white. They should not have that yellowing. So that would be a defect in the color of that patterned bird. The same goes for anything that might be penciled or laced, any kind of smutty or stippled lacing that might be in those feathers. That's definitely a defect. And comparative shape and condition. If I had 2 birds that looked identical, I'm looking for those really fine points to cut points on. So the eye color, maybe the shape of the tail, the shape of where the breastbone and the keel come in together, whether or not she has knock knees, or her knees are touching, her toes, does she have feathers in between her toes where she shouldn't? Are all the feathers there that need to be present? Does she have 10 primary feathers? Does she have 15 secondary feathers, or however many the breed calls for? So comparatively, does one bird have more of the right points than another? And that's how we, as a judge, that's how you separate first from 5th place. Now, there's always an exception to the rule, of course. We can't make it easy. So split wing is typically a disqualification on every single bird, except for the Coshamo. That's one of our newest breeds that's been accepted into the standard. It was accepted in 2014. Those birds allow a split wing, and that's what this picture is showing you here. Split wing is, you can see the difference between the primary flight feathers there on the bottom with the black ticking and the white shafted feather, and the secondary flight feathers, which are those kind of creamy colored ones. The short guy in the middle is the axial feather that separates the two types of feathers. And when you flip those wings out, you can really feel the split between them. My dad raises cochins. They are notorious for throwing birds that have weak or split wings. So in a cochin, it's a disqualification, but in a Cochamo, it's a requirement. So birds that don't have a split wing can be disqualified. One of my favorite showmanship questions when I talk to youth is name an American breed that lays white eggs. And most of the time they've never seen an American breed that lays white eggs, because the only bird that does is the Lamona. All the other American birds in the American class lay a brown egg or at least a tinted egg. So you can disqualify a Lamona if it's sitting in a cage with a brown egg. Americanas and Ericanas, specifically Ericanas, must lack the pygostyle, which is that tailbone. It's a fusion of several different vertebrae, but it is their tailbone. They are truly to be rumpless. So in order to be considered an Ericana, they must lack that pygostyle. They must be muffed, so they've got those fun little ear muffs, like the guy that I showed you earlier. They cannot be bearded, however, and usually muffed and bearded genes run together. So typically, if you have a bird that's muffed, it's going to be bearded as well. In order to be considered an Americana or an Ericana, excuse me, it must not be bearded, but must be muffed. And they have to lay blue-green eggs. So you can see where we can disqualify a bird very quickly if they are lacking these breed type rules. Then a lot of our feather-legged birds, specifically for cochins and Brahmas, they must be feathered down the middle toe. So most birds have 3 toes in the front and 1 in the back. Unless you're a Sultan, you have 4 toes in the front, 1 in the back, or sometimes 2 on the back. It just depends on how their foot configuration looks. But that middle toe must be feathered all the way down. It may not be in condition, so it may not be, all those feathers might not be there, but we need to have evidence that the bird does have that feathering. And the more that we breed cochins to be this big fluffy ball of feathers, the less we see that feathered down the middle toe. And it's an easy way for judges to eliminate the lower quality birds or the birds that don't quite fit the standard. Very obvious one, waterfowl must have webbed feet, but everything else can't. So our ducks and our geese can have webbed feet, but chickens, turkeys, and guineas must not. Believe it or not, I did see a commercial turkey one time with a fully webbed foot. It was just 1 foot. It was very strange, but it was very interesting to see a turkey with a webbed foot. So some of these weird genetic mutations or genetic things that slip through, they can become the standard, especially for like our Cochamos that require that split wing, something that would disqualify any other chicken. So really you don't have to be a judge, you don't have to be an expert, but it really does pay to invest in these books, study your breed, find out what a judge is looking for or what other breeders are looking for, attend some shows, take a look on the internet, and I caution you when you do that, just like anything else on the internet, don't believe everything you read, but there are a lot of resources available to you. And I wish that I would have grown up in this age and not the Stone Age of having to go to every show in the country to learn these things. Being able to communicate with people and communicate with people all over the world like we're doing right now definitely helps to share ideas, and much faster than it ever happened when I was a kid showing chickens. I had to learn from a bunch of old men. So now I know how to talk to old dudes. It's great. Not only do you need a standard, not only do you need to be participating in your hobby, but I really think it's important that you're hatching your own animals. I, for the longest time, could not. My dad's been hatching my birds lately just because I cannot seem to hatch my birds right. So there on the right-hand side, that is my dad's old incubator. He sold it to a friend. It's a cabinet style incubator. It's pretty much like a scaled down commercial incubator. You don't have to go that fancy, but you probably need something better than the 5 egg holding contraption you get on Amazon. I can have a whole nother webinar to talk about incubators for you. I find that some of the older style machines, some of the less techie machines work a lot better. So my Uncle Mike that shows with my dad actually refurbished this machine on the left, added some electronic controls, but it hatches better than some of these brand new pieces of equipment, simply because I think it's kind of like a cast iron skillet. The more seasoned it is, the better it seems to work. So if you're really going to be serious about breeding and exhibiting your own birds, I think you need to invest in an incubator and a hatcher. I like them separate. Again, I could talk all day about incubators and hatchers. Send me an email if you want to talk about that. But like I said, I'm struggling right now, mostly because I have a pretty high-tech piece of equipment. And I grew up on some of these older machines. So yeah, we're just struggling a little bit. You also need a lot of space. I always say chickens are relatively low input cost unless you're going to raise exhibition poultry. So this is, again, my Uncle Mike's place. He's got some of these grow out pens where his white cochins are down there on those floor pens. They get to run together until it's time to pull them out to show. About a couple months before we get to show, we pull them into these cages on the right. They have, the manure can drop down. They're not in contact with that manure. They stay nice, bright, white, shiny, clean. And they have that opportunity to grow back any of the feathers they've lost, as well as just keep the feathers that on their bodies. That's really important. It's not as important until you go to a show, do you see a bird drop all their feathers. But these are what we would call conditioning cages. And so you do need space for conditioning cages. You can see some of his birds down there on the bottom are running around. They're not necessarily in condition. I think those are just his yard birds. We got a question, Jackie?
I have a question. I see you have a pigeon right in the same pen as the chickens.
Yeah, biosecurity.
Biosecurity just sucks.
Yeah, biosecurity. No matter how many degrees in poultry science I get, my dad and my uncle will never listen to me. So they've been showing chickens for 40 years, and I can't tell them anything new. But yes, that is a pigeon. It's a show pigeon, so it's a little bit better than your run-of-the-mill average everyday pigeon. They don't get to fly out and get commingled with any wild species. Yeah, but so that's my dad raises his show pigeons and his chickens together, not necessarily that together, but in the same facility at least.
Okay, so I don't recommend that for anybody else.
No.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I'll crop that out next time. So I threw in some pictures here just to give you some reference points.
There was another question too. What type of flooring in the conditioning pens?
That is actually broiler slat material, broiler breeder slat material. Mike gets it from Farmer Boy Ag here in the US. The same you can use coated wire. It's 1x1 coated wire just so that manure falls through and doesn't collect. And then you also don't have to use as much bedding and scrape shavings out, especially for these cochins have feathers on their feet, so they get really, really dirty really fast when they're walking on manure.
Okay, thanks.
So I put some pictures in here of some show birds versus maybe what you've got running around at home. So this is a buff Orpington. It's not the world's best buff Orpington, but it is a buff Orpington, a show type buff Orpington. So a lot of what I see in backyard flocks, what folks are getting from Tractor Supply, Rural King, and all those other farm supply stores are a lot smaller bodied bird, not as profusely feathered, definitely not as consistent in color. You can tell that the neck feathers, the fluff, and the tail are all pretty much the same color buff. No white feathering throughout that. That would be a disqualification. Even that slight variation in buff isn't really ideal. We want to see a consistent buff color, but that's kind of the ideal shape for an Orpington, really deep bodied bird, a heavy boned bird, not a skinny little thing, but that's kind of the difference when I show kids pictures of hatchery buff Orpingtons or those like farm store buff Orpingtons versus a show buff Orpington, you can kind of see that big difference. That's a big wow moment for a lot of those kids that, wow, my birds don't look like that. And the difference really is that breeding and genetics. Our commercial hatcheries aren't selecting for show genetics. They're selecting to produce more birds so that they can sell more birds. So when we're looking at birds like this, we're definitely looking at somebody who has spent a lot of time selecting different birds for breeding to create this, what they would consider perfect show bird. Here's what a light Brahma should look like, a large fowl light Brahma. You can see that big beefy comb, but it's not lopped over. It's a pea comb, really bright white contrasting with the black, feathers on his feet, yellow legs, a big bodied bird. This is a big boy in a double coop here. I think this was actually at a show in California, in 2018 maybe. So it's been a while, but great example of the Brahma breed. I used to raise these when I was a kid. They were kind of my favorites. They're just big. I considered them kind of like the Saint Bernard of the chicken. They just kind of lumber along. They're not real excitable. They're not real aggressive. Big and foreboding, kind of scary because they're so big, but really docile birds. I loved my light Brahmas when I had them. And then the unfortunate fact of showing birds is that this chicken probably looked wonderful at home, and we stuck her in a box and took her to a chicken show, and this is what happens. She loses all her feathers. She's dropping them one by one. She's either stressed out or it's just time for her to molt. I think this was in a spring show, so maybe she was just a little stressed, maybe getting ready to start laying eggs, and she decided to drop every feather she has. By the end of the show, she was pretty much bald on her wings and on her back. But this is the unfortunate part about showing chickens. You can do everything right at home, bring them to the show, and they don't perform. The other part of that is showing chickens is one judge's opinion on one day. Tomorrow you can show the exact same chicken and place differently. So it really depends on who you're showing to, depends on their skills, their qualifications, and it could also depend on the weather. Sometimes as a kid, I took birds to shows back-to-back weekends, and they performed completely differently because one weekend was hot or cold and the next weekend was the opposite. So just keep that in mind, that you'll be very disappointed if you expect your birds to perform every time. I think that's pretty much any kind of competition, that if you have high expectations, you'll have a pretty low return, it seems. And the big thing here, I can't stress this enough, is spend time with your birds. The picture there on the left is of my barn from this spring when I got turkeys. I have a 4-H bag chair that has followed me around for a very long time. And it's kind of a nasty old lawn chair, but it sits out in my chicken coop. I sit in it just about every night, just observing my birds, how they act, how they treat each other, more from my own behavioral person kind of interest, but it also, I know which bird is going to be able to go to a show, perform well, and be able to handle that stress of the travel, because most of the shows I go to are in Ohio. Handle the stress of travel, handle the stress of being at a show with other birds, and come back home and still be okay. I know which birds are the ones that I'm looking out for. I hatch everything in our dining room over here. We don't use our dining room, but I hatch everything right behind me here in the dining room. And I keep an eye on birds as soon as they hatch out, if I see some characteristics that I think might be promising. This turkey here, I knew was going to be a good show turkey simply because it let me do anything I ever wanted to it. I could pick it up, flip it over, walk it around. Ended up selling it to a young person that was going to show turkeys this year. Unfortunately, was not able to in Pennsylvania. But he can walk this turkey around his yard with a cane, no leash, no enclosure, nothing. This turkey just does whatever it wants. And it'll be a hard day when that turkey has to go to butchering, but that I knew that was going to be a good turkey for him to show and to have an experience with, just because I sat and observed it and played with it a little bit. The picture in the middle is actually at my dad's house. He puts his birds out on the grass just to let them be outside and get some fresh air every once in a while. And that's also how he observes which birds are promising for show. He really likes a bird to be showy and not necessarily aggressive, but ready to to pounce when it gets into a cage. So he lets his 8-pound dachshund and his 40-pound corgi run around these birds. And if they pay attention to those dogs and they don't freak out, but they're paying attention to him, he knows that's going to be a good show bird. On the right, there's my Uncle Mike smoking a cigar and playing with his chickens. But he also has the same thing there. He's got a lawn chair in the barn. He pulled this bird out of the pen and was looking at her, handling that bird, making sure that she's easy to handle and tame enough that she's not going to freak out when a judge reaches in the cage, but also kind of working on training her to keep her tail up and her head up and pose specifically for a judge. Just taking some time to relax and take a step back, look at your birds objectively, and figure out which ones you want to keep in cull. For me, temperament is my biggest pet peeve in chickens, and ducks and geese as well. I raised a lot of geese that were very aggressive and didn't have a good experience with them. So for me, I want my birds to be hand tame, not so hand tame that they don't show, but hand tame enough for me to be able to work with them. If every time I reach my hand in the cage, I get flogged, then that bird doesn't last very long around here. That happened to a couple of birds I had earlier this spring. They went to auction because they just would not calm down no matter how much time I spent with them. And it was just in their nature to be a little more aggressive and flighty. And like I said, for me, that's just not going to work. I want my birds to be tame. I worked in too many commercial chicken houses to get scratched up at home. So that's just how I feel about those birds that get a little flighty. The big thing here is, I'll quote my dad, and that's my dad there and me when I was real little. Still have the curly hair, both of us, but you'll have what you will tolerate. And that message is to take it with a grain of salt or however you want to take it. But you will perpetuate the things in your flock that you allow. There are a lot of folks who claim to have bred out Merricks. There are a lot of folks who have claimed to breed out diseases or breed out bad characteristics or bad traits or breed them in, but you will absolutely perpetuate what you have in your flock and what you allow to have in your flock. So when you're looking at those birds and spending time with them, be really objective about it. I had some sultans this spring that I absolutely loved. They did really well at shows. I needed to cut down to 2. I needed to make a decision between the 4 pullets that I had that, okay, what are we going to keep for breeding? There were 2 that were excellent. And I knew, okay, then these 2 can stay, but I really like those other 2. And they were just so nice and tame and they were easy to handle, but they were slightly too big. And one's crest was a little wobbly. I wasn't really a big fan of it. Or this one had a feather that just wanted to stay out of place all the time. Although, yes, I would have loved to keep those birds because they're very nice. They were of great temperament. I could let them out in the yard. They did whatever they wanted to do, but they weren't going to make it in my breeding program. I didn't want more birds with those wobbly crests. I didn't want more birds that had feathers out of place. Yes, I want more that are going to be docile, but I want to make sure that whatever I'm keeping is going to perpetuate that show flock. And that's the same reason why that kind of funky looking sultan that had the mohawk and the frizzled feathers didn't stay too. That's just not what I was looking for to continue to breed. So, in a very crass statement, but one of those things I learned from an older guy when I was a kid was that the 2 best things that a poultry owner can own are a coccidiostat and a hatchet. And after having 2 rounds of coccidiosis run through my flock since I've had them, I can't agree more that a coccidiostat and a hatchet are two things that you really need. And it's an unfortunate truth in having to own birds that you have to eventually kill some of them. You have to make culls. You have to make a decision on what stays in your flock. And for me, I don't like doing it. So I send my birds to auction. I make somebody else do it and hopefully make a little bit back so I can pay them a feed bill. But my flock stays pretty well closed. I don't bring a lot of new birds in for that purpose that I don't want. I want to start where I'm at with the birds that I have and see how far I can get before I need to bring a new bird in. And I'm the worst about going to Tractor Supply in the spring and oohing and awing over the cute little chicks. That's why I have 2 naked necks out in the barn right now. that are useless. I'm not going to show them, and they have no semblance of breed type or characteristics, but they're just fun to have around and they lay nice eggs. So those are what I call my mother-in-law's chickens. They hang out here, but they're not necessarily part of my show flock. You can't save them all and you can't have them all, because most of the time your feed bill will reflect that. But just remember that you will have what you tolerate. And if you are continually disappointed by something in your flock, maybe it's time to reevaluate what we're tolerating, and then that might change what we have. This is our university statement from Penn State. I'll just throw that out there. If anybody wants to look at it, you can pause it, whatever. And all the photos here are mine unless otherwise noted. So with that, I will turn my camera back on and answer some questions.
You can stop sharing too, so we appear a little bigger.
Yeah.
Okay, there was one comment. In the Philippines, you don't bathe it to prevent molting during the molting season. But if you're showing birds, you have to molt whatever, I mean, you have to wash whatever time of the year, right?
Yep. Typically, if your bird's molting, you're not going to wash it anyway. Let it kick those feathers out, try again. But most of the time you have more than one bird that you're looking to show. Otherwise, you just don't take that one along with you. Like I said,
but he was saying that by not bathing it, you're preventing the molting. So it's not that they're molting, so you shouldn't wash it. It's more that if you don't wash it, it won't molt.
Yeah, I don't know if that's I don't know the science behind that, but hey, if that's gonna work for somebody, I might try it, because it seems like every time I take a bird to a show, they come home with half the feathers they had on them. Might just be a little bit of stress. My birds are rather pampered.
Yeah. What is a good resource for how to build good but not expensive coops and pens?
There are a lot of YouTube videos on that. And I know Penn State has some great resources about size, based on the type of breed that you have. Actually, I created a spreadsheet when I was still in that position. You can find your breed, how many of those that you have, and it will kick out on the end how many square feet you need, linear square feet. Kuiper Cooping Company also makes really great show cages. Everything I have right now is, I have Bantam birds, so everything's in goose cages. So I bought 4 goose cages, and that keeps about 2 to 3 Bantam birds pretty happy. I give them lots of roosting space, so they have a lot more square footage height wise, so they can get up on those roosts. But for a large fowl bird, you probably need at least 3 square feet per bird for show birds, because they're gonna rub those feathers on wire. They're gonna break feathers. They're going to fight. They're going to get, they're gonna cuddle. they're gonna do one way or the other to kind of prevent your condition. No matter how well you try to condition, birds will do something. I used to raise white Wyandottes when I was a kid, and it didn't matter how small of a box we put them in to transport them to a show. They would roll around in their own manure, and I would take a white bird to the show and get it out of the box, and it would be brown. I don't know what about a white Wyandotte that it's just obsessed with rolling in its own manure, but we finally learned that you have to take an old towel and wrap the bird up like a burrito, a chicken burrito, and stick it down in the pen, and then it can't roll in anything because it's already rolled up. Right. Which sounds terrible from an animal welfare perspective, but it's a lot better than being covered in manure, I would assume.
So, health-wise, definitely. Yeah. And of course, depending on what breed, I mean, if you have one of those long-tailed breeds, you need special housing for the long-tailed breeds. Yeah. But there is a book that I have, I can't remember who put it out, but it is on like 101 designs for do-it-yourself housing and stuff like that. So there's a lot of good books. There's a lot of good videos. My dad, when he used to breed the small bantams, he just made A-frame housing that he could use for a trio of birds out on the pasture during the summer, and then he stacked them to some degree inside in the winter if he still wanted to breed them.
I didn't put the picture in here. I should have done that. Of a guy that for his young males, he grows them out individually in old chemical containers. So he'll wash it. He used to be a USDA meat inspector, so he'd get them free from the plant. In these old white or blue barrel containers, he just cut a hole in the door or for the door, and one bird would fit in there. He put shavings in the bottom, and then no way could those birds break feathers because there's no wire for them to rub up against. It's all smooth sides, which I thought was really inventive, and they stack really well too. So he could put 50 birds in this barn because he had space for that, all of those barrels. So I know a lot of folks that raise birds use found objects. It's very, very DIY friendly if you're a DIYer, or you can also purchase too. Lots of folks have capitalized on the folks that don't want to DIY everything.
Yeah. Any other questions? We have about 4 minutes to the top of the hour. I think those were the only questions that I had seen. We had a little discussion going on about game fowl with fighting cocks, which of course is popular in the Philippines, but that's not what this was meant for since it's illegal here.
Yeah.
Heather Crowley says great information. So it appears that everybody has gotten their questions answered. Oh, how do you control who breeds with whom? Mini free range, and that's pretty well impossible in this setting. That's why I was saying you have the breeding pens.
Yeah, you really do have to separate your males and females. When I put things together, it's that they're in their home. They don't go outside, mostly for my own protection. Got some pretty high value birds. I don't want them to get high path AI because I know it's running rampant around here. My guineas, on the other hand, run free and they do whatever they want. So they, I don't know who's breeding who in the guineas. I just get chicks it seems like every year. But yeah, if you pen those birds up, like I said, I use those Kuiper Cooping Company goose cages. That typically keeps 2 to 3 bantams really well. Any more than that, you have to clean pretty frequently, and they start to pick on each other a little bit. But yeah, to pen them together and to decide who's breeding, which ones you want to breed together. That's the art behind all of this that we really didn't talk about it. There's some science too, but mostly it's an art form, and some folks have really capitalized on that.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about that last month with the introduction to poultry genetics, but you have to select, and if you're really into the genetics, you have to keep track of who bred who, and then which female come from which line is going to go to, which male, and, you have to keep track of the genetic background of your birds and to select out. But yeah, once you've decided that, then you have to figure out how to actually go about breeding them. So
yeah, last year I was down to 1 male, and I was moving him around quite a bit. So luckily my husband's a farmer. We get a ton of free calendars per year from all sorts of different equipment companies. So I had a tractor calendar out in the chicken house, and that was where I would mark when I moved the male into a different pen. All my chickens are named because I'm insane. All my cows are named too, but all my chickens, I would, Dave moved to this pen, Dave moved to that pen. And that way I kept track of, when I was marking my eggs to set, it would be DX, whatever the female, her name was. So I could keep track of who was who, and when that chick hatched, who it was out of, and whether or not Dave got to stay. Basically, that was my experiment of whether or not we kept Dave. Dave ended up going to auction. Dave did not stay. So.
Yeah. Do you recommend any particular type of leg or wing band for identification of your breeding chickens?
Personally, I hate wing bands. I've banded too many chicks.
Off.
They always fall off. I like, and I don't have any in the house right now, I don't think, but the American Bantam Association sells permanent seamless leg bands. They go on about 3 to 4 weeks of age, you kind of have to test it out. Because they're kind of like permanent jewelry. They go on and they're not supposed to fall off. Well, if they fall off, you got to wait another week to put them back on. And they're different sizes based on the breed. They have a chart on the website that can help you with that. It also is year marked, so each year gets a different color. So you can tell when those birds were hatched. There's also some ones that are rideable. The only thing I really don't recommend are zip ties most of the time, because the zip tie doesn't grow with the bird. I've seen far too many birds come from auction that have zip ties that have like grown into their leg because the zip tie is too tight. So I definitely don't recommend those. I know for a while they were selling like little charms to go on the zip ties. Not a fan, but any of those seamless ones, like I said, they're meant to fit those types of birds and breed specific for the size. So I really like those, and it helps me keep track of when each bird was hatched too.
There is also some that you can just put through the skin of the neck, and it's a tag that hangs out. But once you're showing, you don't want that on there, I would assume. So
yeah, a lot of folks will still wing band for show, but I've not found a lot of success in anything bigger than like an Old English game that's real tiny. They seem to stay in really well for them, but anything bigger than that, they're going to fall out.
Yeah. Okay, time is up. Thank you very much, Emily. Again, you did a great job. I'll be in touch. You'll do some more for us, right?
Of course, yeah. There's not very many of us, so we got to stick together.
Right. Okay, thank you guys for joining. Hopefully you will join us next month when we talk about litter management in a backyard flock. So take care, everybody. Have a good weekend. See you, Emily.
Thanks.